The second major right you have as a tenant in Maine is the right to live in safe, decent housing. There's two laws in Maine that protect tenants. One is the Warranty of Habitability Act, and one is the Repair and Deduct Act. The Warranty of Habitability Act applies in any situation in which the rental unit is unsafe for human habitation. So it has to be a pretty serious problem, but something like unsafe drinking water, inadequate heat in the wintertime, bed bugs. Those are all violations of those can all be violations of the Warranty of Habitability Act. Now, there's one important caveat to the Warranty of Habitability Act. When you complain to your landlord about a violation of the Warranty of Habitability Act, in order to take advantage of this law, you must be current on your rental payments. So it's not okay not to pay your rent for 3 or 4 months and then complain to the landlord about a problem. In order to take advantage of this law, your rent has to be current at the time you make the landlord aware of the problem. So typically what we advise tenants to do is send to the landlord a written notice of what the problem is, let's say unsafe drinking water or a leaky roof or inadequate heat in the winter. And then if the landlord doesn't do anything, contact the code enforcement office. If you're going to try to force the landlord to fix a problem in the apartment, you need to document the existence of the problem. And one of the ways to do that is to contact the code enforcement officer and get them to help document what the problem is. If there is a problem in most places in the state of Maine, the code enforcement office will contact the landlord and request that the landlord make repairs. If the landlord still doesn't make the repairs, there's two things. You can sue the landlord in court to force the repairs to be made. The other thing that may often happens is a lot of times if there's a serious warranty of habitability problem, a tenant will stop paying rent. We are very reluctant to ever advise a tenant not to pay rent. If a tenant doesn't pay rent, they put themselves at significant risk of being evicted. And if they have a subsidy, they are at significant risk of losing that subsidy if they are found to have not paid rent without cause. The other thing you can do if there's a serious problem is you can take advantage of the Maine repair and deduct law. So what that means is if there's a problem that threatens the health and safety of a tenant can pay out of their own pocket to repair the problem and deduct that money from their rent. In order to take advantage of that, you have to provide the landlord a notice of the problem, and you have to advise the landlord that if the landlord doesn't correct the problem within 14 days, you're going to take your own money and you're going to repair the problem. So there is a limit about how much money you can spend in order to repair the problem. Typically, you can't spend more than $500 or 1/2 of 1 month's rent to pay for the problem. There's an exception to that. If the building that you're living in is in foreclosure, there's no limit to the amount that you can spend in order to correct the problem. And that exception is there because a lot of times what we found is that when a building goes into a foreclosure, no one is taking care of it, and a lot of things are going wrong. And so that's an effort to try to protect tenants from a situation in which there's a lot of problems in the unit and nobody's taking responsibility. Also, if your landlord if you have a rental agreement which calls for your landlord to pay for utilities, and your landlord does not pay for utilities, you can contact the utility company, pay for the utilities, and deduct the amount of the utilities from your rent. Also, if you take advantage of either of these laws, you have protections in Maine law. So, for instance, we spoke earlier that if you're a tenant at will, your landlord can serve you with a 30-day notice to quit and doesn't have to have a reason. However, if you have asserted your rights under the Maine warranty of habitability law or the repair and deduct law, if your landlord tries to evict you, there's a presumption that the landlord is doing that in retaliation for you asserting your rights under these laws. And if the court agrees that the landlord did this in retaliation for you asserting your rights under one of these laws, the court cannot order you to be evicted from the unit. And this presumption of retaliation lasts for 6 months after you first asserted your rights under either of these laws. Another right you have as a tenant is that you cannot be forced to pay for someone else's utilities. Also, you cannot be forced to pay for the utilities in a common area. And utilities include heat or electricity. So if you are paying if it turns out that you are paying utilities in a common area, let's say for the lights in the hallway, you should notify your landlord of that problem. If your landlord does not correct that problem, your landlord has to pay you the actual damage that you've suffered as a result of paying the utilities, or $250, whichever is more. The only exception to this is that if you've entered into a written agreement with your landlord where the landlord agrees to reduce the amount of the rent that you have to pay for the rental unit by a specific amount in return for your agreement to pay for the utilities in a common area. And so that's the only exception to this law. If you haven't, it doesn't apply. There's no exception to the law if you entered into a verbal agreement with your landlord. It has to be in writing, and it has to be for a specific reduction in your rent.